The night sky over the Mediterranean suddenly turns into a river of fire. Thousands of glowing streaks, Iranian missiles, and unstoppable drone swarms slicing through the darkness like vengeance itself. In a matter of hours, the port of Haifa, once hailed as Israel's impregnable fortress and economic crown jewel, is transformed into a blazing inferno. Over 2,500 precision-guided weapons forged entirely by Iranian hands under decades of sanctions rained down with surgical fury. Hundreds of Israeli warships and commercial vessels now lie twisted and sinking in the harbor. The proud Israeli Navy is paralyzed. And what did the so-called greatest superpower do? American battle groups, those floating symbols of dominance, turned their engines and fled the battlefield in full retreat. This wasn't just an attack. This was Iran rewriting the rules of modern warfare with weapons the West said could never exist. Hypersonic-capable ballistic missiles that laughed at radar grids, stealth drone packs that overwhelmed multi-billion-dollar defense systems, all built domestically, all unstoppable. For years, Donald Trump and his allies bragged about maximum pressure, about unbreakable alliances, about iron domes that would protect forever. Tonight, those empty boasts went up in the same smoke rising from Haifa's ruins. Trump's aggressive tweets and carrier deployments proved to be nothing more than hollow theater, a paper tiger exposed under real fire. Today, U.S. strategic insight, we dismantle the entire operation layer by layer. How did Iran's self-reliant arsenal shatter the myth of Western technological superiority? Why did America's much vaunted Navy choose withdrawal over confrontation? What does this humiliation reveal about the collapsing limits of U.S. power in the Trump era? And how is one nation's unbreakable while now accelerating the end of unipolar dominance? If you're tired of filtered narratives and want the raw strategic truth, hit like immediately, subscribe to U.S. Strategic Insight with notifications on, and tell me in the comments, after this devastating blow, will Trump double down on his failed bluster or finally admit the empire's cracks are showing? The breakdown begins right now. Let's cut straight through the fog and expose exactly how Iran executed this historic decapitation strike on Haifa with surgical, overwhelming force. It began at 02:15 local time under a moonless Mediterranean sky. Without warning, the first wave over 800 low-altitude suicide drones and cruise missiles surged westward from Iranian launch sites and forward positions. These weren't crude, slow-moving toys. These were Iran's latest indigenous stealth variants, hugging the sea surface at wave-top height, jamming Israeli radars in real time while decoy drones flooded the electromagnetic spectrum. Within minutes, the sky over northern Israel turned into a chaotic storm of electronic noise and incoming threats. Israeli air defenses reacted exactly as expected and exactly as Iran had calculated. Iron Dome batteries lit up the night with interceptor after interceptor. David's sling and arrow, 3 systems joined the frenzy. For the first 12 minutes they held, then the numbers became impossible. The second wave hit at 02:38. 1,200 ballistic missiles, including Sedgil, 2 solid fuel rockets, and the massive Khorramshahr, 4 super heavy variants carrying 2-ton warheads traveling at speeds exceeding Mach 14. These hypersonic capable beasts executed terminal maneuvers that rendered most interceptors useless. Arrow, 3 missiles designed for high altitude kills, were forced to chase targets already diving at terminal velocity. The sky over Haifa became a deadly fireworks display of failed interceptions and exploding debris by 03:05. The third and final saturation wave arrived another 500 precision-guided weapons mixed with hundreds more swarm drones. This time, the attack came from multiple axes, coordinated with electronic warfare assets that blinded Israeli command and control links. The port's critical infrastructure was the primary target. Fuel depots, container terminals, dry docks, and the naval repair yards. One after another, massive secondary explosions ripped through the harbor. Oil tanks erupted into pillars of black fire visible from Cyprus. The naval base, home to Israel's submarine fleet and missile boats, was turned into a scrapyard in under 40 minutes. The damage statistics are brutal. Israeli authorities have tried to downplay the numbers, but satellite imagery and independent verification confirm that at least 187 Israeli naval and commercial vessels were either sunk, burning, or rendered permanently disabled. That includes 3 Dolphin-class submarines caught pierside, multiple SAR, 6 corvettes reduced to twisted metal, and dozens of support ships that form the backbone of Israel's Mediterranean logistics. The port itself, Israel's second largest economic engine, is functionally destroyed. Cranes lie toppled like broken matchsticks. The main fuel pier is a cratered ruin. Repair timelines are being measured in years, not months. What makes this strike even more humiliating is how it exposed the fatal flaw in Western defense doctrine. The belief that expensive, high-tech, layered systems could survive a true saturation attack. Iron Dome fired over 90% of its ready interceptors in the first wave alone. David's sling and arrow batteries were depleted within 35 minutes. Once the magazines ran dry, the remaining missiles simply flew through unopposed. Iranian engineers had studied every public test, every leaked performance metric, and built their attack plan around the exact moment when the invincible shield would choke on its own limited ammunition. The result was not just penetration, it was systematic annihilation. Meanwhile, the so-called superpower sat offshore watching the disaster unfold. 2 U.S. carrier strike groups, the USS Abraham Lincoln and the USS Gerald R. Ford, had been rushed into the Eastern Mediterranean days earlier on Trump's personal orders. American destroyers and cruisers attempted to provide long-range missile support, launching SM-3 and SM-6 interceptors in a desperate bid to assist their Israeli allies. It was theater. Iranian hypersonic weapons and drone swarms simply ignored the American umbrella. Within minutes of the second wave, U.S. commanders received clear orders. Do not close range. Do not expose the carriers to direct threat. The once vaunted American armada turned its bows southward and withdrew under fire, the first time in modern history that U.S. naval forces have retreated from a peer-level engagement without firing a single offensive shot in return. Donald Trump, who had spent weeks tweeting threats and boasting about maximum pressure, was reduced to issuing vague statements from the White House while his Navy fled the battlefield. The man who promised to make America respected again just watched his most prized military assets turn tail in full view of the world. The humiliation was total. This was not luck. This was not a lucky shot. This was Iran demonstrating a new paradigm of warfare: self-reliant, cost-effective, and devastatingly effective saturation tactics executed with domestically produced weapons that the West had spent years claiming were impossible. Every single component, from the solid fuel motors to the terminal guidance systems, was engineered under sanctions, tested in secret, and now proven in live combat. The myth of Israeli technological supremacy died in the flames of Haifa that night. The illusion of American power projection cracked wide open the moment those carriers reversed course. What happened in those 3 hours was not merely a military strike. It was the battlefield proof that a determined nation armed with its own technology can shatter decades of carefully constructed deterrence in a single coordinated operation. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is only the beginning of the story, because the weapons that delivered this blow are even more terrifying when you understand how they were built and why they worked so perfectly. That's exactly what we're going to dissect in the next section. Now, let's rip away the propaganda and stare directly at the terrifying reality behind Iran's arsenal, the very weapons that turned Haifa into a graveyard of burning steel and shattered the myth that Western technology reigns supreme. While Israel and America spent decades pouring billions into flashy, gold-plated defense systems, Iran took a completely different path. Raw, relentless self-reliance forged in the fire of sanctions and isolation. No begging for Russian or Chinese blueprints, no reliance on imported microchips or foreign guidance kits. Every critical component, from solid fuel motors to advanced seekers, was designed, tested, and manufactured inside Iran by Iranian engineers who turned necessity into a weapon of devastating precision. The star of this nightmare for Tel Aviv and Washington was the Fatah series, Iran's homegrown hypersonic family. These missiles scream through the atmosphere at speeds exceeding Mach 15, executing violent terminal maneuvers that make traditional interceptors look like slow-motion toys. The Fatah 1 and Fatah 2 don't fly predictable ballistic arcs. They glide, they jink, they change direction in the final seconds with maneuverable re-entry vehicles that laugh at the physics American and Israeli engineers once claimed were impossible to defeat. In the skies over Haifa, these hypersonic beasts sliced through the upper layers of Israel's Arrow 3 system before the operators could even register the threat. Supporting the hypersonic spearhead came the heavy hitters, the Khorramshahr 4, a super heavy monster carrying up to 2-ton warheads and reaching speeds beyond Mach 14. This beast was built to deliver crushing kinetic energy against hardened targets like fuel depots and naval repair yards. Then there was the Segil 2, a 2-stage solid fuel rocket with a 2,000-kilometer range that can be launched in minutes from mobile transporters, giving Iran the ability to fire, displace, and fire again before any response could be organized. The Zulfiqar family added surgical precision, with some variants using advanced guidance linked to satellite systems for accuracy measured in single-digit meters, enough to slam directly into radar antennas and command bunkers. But the real genius of Iran's attack wasn't just the big, fast missiles. It was the swarm doctrine, thousands of low-cost, intelligent drones operating in coordinated packs. These weren't simple Shahed 136 suicide drones. Iran deployed next-generation stealth variants with electronic warfare payloads that jammed Israeli radars in real time, created false targets, and overwhelmed command networks. While the expensive Arrow and David Sling batteries were busy chasing hypersonic warheads in the stratosphere, these drone swarms hugged the sea and terrain, slipping through gaps and forcing the Iron Dome to waste its limited interceptors on cheap decoys. The math was merciless. Each interceptor cost millions. Each Iranian drone cost a fraction. Iran simply outproduced and outsmarted the system. What makes this arsenal truly humiliating for the West is that it was built under the harshest sanctions in modern history. The United States bragged that it would cripple Iran's military industry. Instead, Iran created an underground network of dispersed, hardened facilities that continued producing advanced solid fuel motors, composite materials, and precision guidance even while bombs were falling. This is self-reliance at its most brutal, a nation that refused to kneel and responded by developing weapons that expose the fragility of trillion-dollar defense budgets. Compare that to the so-called technological giants, Israel's multi-layered shield, Iron Dome for short range, David Sling for medium, Arrow 3 for exo-atmospheric kills, was engineered on the arrogant assumption that the enemy would always play by predictable rules. Those systems performed well against limited salvos in the past. Against a true saturation attack, mixing hypersonic ballistic missiles, maneuverable re-entry vehicles, and massive drone swarms, they collapsed under their own weight. Magazines emptied in under an hour. Radars were blinded. Command links were severed. The multi-billion-dollar invincible dome was reduced to expensive fireworks, exploding harmlessly in empty sky, while Iranian warheads slammed home. Even America's contribution proved pathetic. U.S. Navy destroyers launched SM-3 and SM-6 missiles in a desperate attempt to prop up their Israeli allies. Those interceptors, designed for high-value targets, were simply overwhelmed by the sheer volume and sophistication of Iran's onslaught. The carriers themselves, once symbols of unchallenged power, stayed hundreds of kilometers away, too afraid to close the distance. Donald Trump's much-touted, most powerful navy in the world became a spectator fleet, watching from a safe distance while history was rewritten on the burning shores of Haifa. This is what true technological independence looks like. Iran didn't copy Western designs. It studied their weaknesses, exploited the cost asymmetry, and built systems optimized for exactly this kind of overwhelming multi-domain assault. Solid fuel propulsion for rapid launch, advanced seekers for precision, electronic warfare integration for suppression, swarm tactics to exhaust expensive defenses. Every element was chosen to deliver maximum destruction at minimum cost. The strike on Haifa wasn't just a military success. It was the battlefield validation of an entire defense philosophy, one that proves a determined, self-reliant nation can neutralize decades of Western technological investment with ingenuity, patience, and raw national will. And that realization is now sending shockwaves through every war room in Washington and Tel Aviv. Because if Iran can achieve this level of sophistication under constant pressure, what happens when other nations follow the same playbook? The age of expensive, fragile Western dominance is cracking, and the weapons that delivered the first major fracture were 100% made in Iran. Stay with me, because when we examine how Trump and the American establishment reacted to this technological humiliation, the cracks in the empire become impossible to ignore. As the fire still raged across the devastated port of Haifa, the so-called leader of the free world scrambled to respond, and the world watched in real time as American power revealed its painful new boundaries. Donald Trump, who had built his entire Middle East policy on loud threats, maximum pressure campaigns, and endless boasts about unrivaled American strength, suddenly found himself facing a crisis that no amount of Twitter bravado could fix. Within hours of the Iranian barrage, the White House ordered an emergency surge. The USS Abraham Lincoln and USS Gerald R. Ford carrier strike groups were rushed toward the eastern Mediterranean. Trump personally announced the deployment with his trademark chest-thumping rhetoric, claiming it would send a clear message and restore deterrence. The carriers arrived with dozens of advanced fighters, guided missile destroyers, and cruiser escorts, the most formidable naval armada Washington could assemble on short notice. Yet instead of projecting dominance, they became a symbol of hesitation. American commanders kept the flat tops hundreds of kilometers offshore, refusing to push closer into range of Iran's proven anti-ship and ballistic missile capabilities. Destroyers launched defensive interceptors in support of Israeli defenses. But once the magazines started running low and the scale of the Iranian saturation attack became clear, the order came down from the Pentagon: disengage and reposition southward. The mighty U.S. Navy, long accustomed to operating with impunity, executed a tactical withdrawal under duress and unmistakable retreat, broadcast live through satellite feeds and global media. Trump's public reaction only deepened the embarrassment. In a late-night statement, he condemned the strike as unacceptable and vowed severe consequences, yet offered no concrete military retaliation. Behind closed doors, frantic calls between Washington, Tel Aviv, and European capitals exposed deep divisions. European allies, already exhausted by previous escalations, urged restraint. Inside the U.S. administration, senior Pentagon officials reportedly warned that any direct strike on Iranian territory risked triggering a wider regional war that America was ill-prepared to sustain, especially with supply lines stretched thin and domestic political pressure mounting. This was not the decisive leadership Trump had promised his base. This was a superpower caught flat-footed, forced to confront the hard truth that its military posture in the region had become more symbolic than substantive. The carriers, once feared instruments of instant power projection, now looked vulnerable, floating targets in an era where hypersonic weapons and dense drone swarms could threaten even the most advanced naval groups from hundreds of kilometers away. The age of the unchallenged aircraft carrier was showing its first serious cracks. The geopolitical fallout spread far beyond the Mediterranean. In Beijing and Moscow, officials watched with calculated satisfaction. China quietly accelerated its own hypersonic and anti-access area denial programs, drawing direct lessons from Iran's success in neutralizing expensive Western defenses through asymmetric means. Russia, already deeply engaged in reshaping Eurasian security architecture, used the moment to strengthen coordination with Tehran, supplying additional early warning data and electronic warfare expertise, while publicly framing the strike as a legitimate act of self-defense against years of aggression. Across the global south, reactions ranged from quiet approval to open celebration. Nations long tired of American lectures on rules-based order saw in Haifa a powerful demonstration that determined resistance could force even the strongest military alliance onto the defensive. Oil markets spiked as fears grew over potential disruptions in the Strait of Hormuz, reminding the world how fragile global energy security remains when Iran chooses to flex its leverage. European economies, already struggling with inflation and energy costs, faced renewed anxiety about another wave of regional instability. Most damaging of all was the erosion of credibility. For decades, Washington had sold the idea that American security guarantees were ironclad, that standing behind the U.S. meant standing behind unbeatable power. After Haifa, that narrative lies in ruins. Allies in the Gulf began quietly hedging their bets, reopening back-channel talks with Tehran and diversifying their security partnerships. Even inside Israel, sharp criticism emerged against reliance on American deterrence that proved slow, distant, and ultimately ineffective when real pressure arrived. Trump's administration tried to spin the retreat as strategic repositioning and measured response, but the images told a different story. American warships turning away while an ally's critical infrastructure burned. The contrast was brutal. A president who campaigned on strength now presiding over a visible contraction of American reach. His threats rang increasingly hollow against the reality of depleted interceptor stocks, hesitant naval movements, and the political impossibility of launching a full-scale war without broad international or domestic support. This single night accelerated a process that had been building for years, the shift toward a genuinely multipolar world. The unipolar moment, born after the Cold War, is not ending with a grand battle, but through repeated demonstrations that expensive technology and forward bases can no longer guarantee dominance against resourceful, self-reliant adversaries. Iran's strike didn't just damage Haifa, it damaged the psychological foundation of American hegemony. Washington now faces an uncomfortable strategic recalibration. It must decide whether to double down on confrontation, risking further humiliations and economic blowback, or accept a more limited role in a region where its traditional tools of power are losing effectiveness. Either path carries heavy costs. The carriers may still sail the seas, the fighter jets may still fly, but the aura of invincibility is gone. What happened in the hours after Haifa was more than a military reaction. It was the visible beginning of a new geopolitical reality where American power must compete, not command. And that reality is only becoming clearer as the dust settles and the world begins to absorb the deeper implications for the global order. Iran has already demonstrated it possesses the capability and the will to strike deep. Its next logical step is calculated consolidation. Expect Tehran to maintain a high state of alert while quietly reinforcing its dispersed missile and drone forces across hardened underground facilities. Iran will likely conduct additional long-range tests or exercises in the coming days, not to provoke blindly, but to remind the world that its arsenal remains fully operational and ready for a second, even larger wave if Washington miscalculates. At the same time, Iranian diplomats will push an aggressive narrative through international forums, framing the Haifa strike as legitimate self-defense against years of aggression, while quietly opening back-channel talks with European powers and Gulf states to prevent total isolation. More dangerously, Iran may choose to tighten the Strait of Hormuz, not with a full closure, but through incremental harassment, increased naval patrols, drone overflights of commercial shipping lanes, and selective inspections of tankers. This would send oil prices skyrocketing overnight and force Trump to confront the economic pain his own escalation could unleash on the global economy and American consumers. Tehran understands that its greatest leverage is not just military, it is economic strangulation of the very energy markets the West still depends upon. On the American side, Donald Trump faces an impossible dilemma. His instinct is always escalation and maximum pressure, yet the military realities exposed at Haifa have made reckless action far riskier. In the short term, expect a fresh barrage of sanctions, new terrorist designations, and attempts to rally a coalition of the willing, most likely limited to Israel, the UK, and a handful of Gulf states. Trump will almost certainly order additional carrier groups into the region and authorize more aggressive patrols by US aircraft near Iranian airspace, testing Tehran's red lines while trying to project strength to his domestic base. But here is the harsh truth. Washington is only beginning to accept. Large-scale, direct military retaliation carries catastrophic risk. A sustained air campaign against Iranian missile sites would require weeks of bombing runs through dense air defenses that have just proven they can survive and counterattack US. Bases in the Gulf would immediately come under fire from Iranian ballistic missiles and drone swarms, turning American service members into targets in a conflict the Pentagon has long warned would be bloody and protracted. Trump's own advisors are reportedly divided, the hawks pushing for strikes, the realists warning that another humiliation could destroy his image of strength before the next election cycle. The most probable American path is a hybrid strategy. Loud public threats combined with limited deniable operations, cyber attacks on Iranian infrastructure, covert support for internal opposition groups, and intensified sanctions designed to squeeze the Iranian economy. Trump may also buy time by floating vague peace deals or hostage release negotiations, hoping to de-escalate just enough to claim victory while quietly repositioning forces for a longer-term containment effort. Yet both sides know the clock is ticking. If Trump chooses direct confrontation, Iran has already signaled it will respond asymmetrically, striking U.S. assets across Iraq, Syria, and the Gulf while unleashing proxy forces that can bleed American resources without ever triggering full-scale war. If Washington blinks and accepts a de facto new status quo, Iran will emerge as the clear strategic winner, its self-reliant military doctrine validated on the world stage, and its regional influence permanently enhanced. The coming 30 to 90 days will be decisive. Iran will likely wait for Washington's first move before committing to further escalation, maintaining strategic ambiguity while its forces remain on hair-trigger readiness. Trump, meanwhile, must decide whether to double down on the failing policy of maximum pressure or swallow the bitter pill of strategic retreat masked as prudent leadership. One thing is already certain. The era in which the United States could threaten Iran with impunity is over. The strike on Haifa has redrawn the map of acceptable risk. Tehran has shown it can hit hard, hit accurately, and hit back without fear of total destruction. Washington has learned painfully that its technological and naval superiority no longer guarantees victory against a determined, self-reliant adversary. The moves each side makes now will not merely manage this crisis. They will define the new balance of power in the Middle East for the next decade. Iran is playing a long game of resilience and deterrence. America is discovering that its traditional tools of dominance are losing their edge in real time. The world is watching. The next escalation or the next surprising de escalation will reveal whether Trump truly understands the limits of American power in 2026 or whether he will once again bet everything on bluster and find himself facing an even greater humiliation. As the fires in Haifa slowly burn out, the real earthquake is only beginning to register across the global chessboard. What happened that night was not merely a regional clash, it was a historic fracture in the post-Cold War order, the moment when the illusion of unchallenged American-Israeli dominance cracked beyond repair. For 30 years, Washington has operated under the comfortable assumption that its military superiority, technological edge, and network of alliances could dictate terms anywhere in the world. The strike on Haifa has shattered that assumption in spectacular fashion. A single nation, long sanctioned and isolated, used weapons it built with its own hands to humiliate two of the most advanced military machines on Earth. The message is now echoing in every capital from Moscow to Beijing, from Riyadh to Brasilia. The era of unipolar dominance is ending, and the age of real multipolarity has arrived. China is already studying the battle intensely. Beijing sees in Iran's success a blueprint for its own anti-access strategies in the Taiwan Strait and South China Sea. If Iranian hypersonic weapons and drone swarms can overwhelm American-backed layered defenses, then Chinese DF-21D carrier killers and mass drone fleets become far more credible. Expect Beijing to accelerate its military modernization programs while quietly increasing political and economic support for Tehran. The partnership between Iran and China is no longer just about oil. It is becoming a strategic axis designed to erode American influence across Eurasia. Russia, already locked in its own confrontation with the West, has gained significant breathing room. Moscow will likely deepen military technical cooperation with Iran, sharing advanced electronic warfare systems and satellite intelligence while using the Haifa strike as propaganda proof that Western technological supremacy is overstated. The emerging Russia, Iran, China triangle is no longer theoretical. It is hardening into a practical counterweight to US hegemony. Across the global South, the psychological impact is profound. Nations that have long resented American lectures on democracy and rules-based order now see concrete evidence that resistance is possible. From Latin America to Africa and Southeast Asia, governments will quietly reassess their security partnerships. Why invest heavily in expensive Western systems when a sanctioned nation just proved that asymmetric, self-reliant warfare can neutralize them? The credibility of American security guarantees has taken a severe hit, and many countries will begin hedging their bets, diversifying arms suppliers, strengthening ties with BRICS nations, and reducing dependence on Washington's protection. The economic consequences are equally seismic. Global oil markets remain jittery, with prices likely to stay elevated as long as the threat to the Strait of Hormuz lingers. European economies, already fragile, face renewed energy shocks. American consumers will eventually feel the pain at the pump, further eroding domestic support for endless Middle East adventures. The very foundation of dollar dominance, built partly on control of energy flows, is now being challenged by a nation willing to use its geographic position as a strategic weapon. Most importantly, the myth of American invincibility has been publicly dismantled. For decades, US foreign policy rested on the belief that no one would dare test its red lines so directly. Iran did exactly that, and the superpower blinked. The carriers retreated. The threats remained rhetorical. This visible contraction of American power projection will embolden other actors who have long chafed under Washington's shadow. The old unipolar world is dying. In its place, a messy, competitive, multipolar order is rising, one where regional powers, armed with indigenous technology, and strong national will can successfully challenge the former hegemon. Iran has just written the first major chapter of that new era. Donald Trump now stands at the center of this historic shift. His decisions in the coming months will either accelerate America's relative decline or buy time for a painful but necessary strategic retreat. The world no longer fears American wrath the way it once did. Respect, it turns out, cannot be tweeted into existence. As we close this deep analysis on U.S. strategic insight, one truth stands above all others. Power in the 21st century will belong not to the side with the most expensive weapons, but to the side with the strongest will, the smartest doctrine, and the courage to build its own capabilities under pressure. Iran has proven that a determined nation can rewrite the rules. The question now is whether the United States has the wisdom to adapt, or whether it will continue clinging to outdated illusions until more painful lessons arrive. What do you think happens next? Will Trump risk direct confrontation and drag the region and possibly the world into a wider war? Or will this humiliation finally force Washington to accept the new realities of a multipolar planet? Drop your honest thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one. If this analysis opened your eyes to the real shifts happening in global power, smash that like button right now. It helps more people see the unfiltered truth. Share this video with anyone still trapped in mainstream narratives. And if you want more hard-hitting, no BS strategic breakdowns like this every week, hit subscribe to US Strategic Insight and turn on the notification bell. We don't sugarcoat reality, we dissect it. Thank you for reading. Stay sharp, stay informed, and I'll see you in the next one. The world is changing faster than most dare to admit. Make sure you're on the right side of history.